This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 469, featuring Ray Palumbo, retired United States Army 3-star general and co-founder and senior partner of Venturi Solutions. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vassalopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And as Jim said, episode 469. And it seems like lately, every time Jim says episode whatever, it's like a surprise. Like, I can't believe we made it that far. But we have. We've been at it for nine years and still going strong. And if we are doing episode 469, that means we have 468 other episodes in our catalog. Chances are you have a problem, issue, challenge, opportunity. We got an episode for you. Just call us and let us know. And this episode, again, is brought to you by Darley. Darley supports all our military and first responders with the equipment they need to ensure mission success, whether that's a drone or emergency medical supplies. Learn more about this great company and the fantastic people supporting our nation's heroes at darley.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
And speaking of Darley, our guest today, Ray, is an introduction from Paul Darley. And let me tell you a little bit about Ray. He's just an amazing human. He's a former 3-star general, having served 34 years in uniform, leading conventional and special operations forces during both peacetime and in combat. He's a former 160th Squadron pilot and a graduate of West Point, among his many academic achievements. Currently serves on many boards, including our sponsor, Darley, and is the co-founder of his own firm, Venturi Solutions. Ray is passionate. He's a passionate philanthropist and is committed to improving the lives of injured military and intelligence community veterans and the well-being of Gold Star families from those communities. He's served with former guests such as Stephen McChrystal, Mike Rogers, and many others, and he's just an all-around great human. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Let me just begin by congratulating you on 9 years and 468 podcasts already. I guess you got some milestones coming up, 510 years. Maybe you can align that and have a big celebration. But boy, you promoted podcasts when before podcasts became even popular, right? Yeah. So that's a little alliteration. Say that one 3 times fast. But anyway. Yeah, it's wonderful to be here, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you. And, Paul reached out a while back and he said, oh, you got to meet Ray. And so we got together and talked one afternoon, and it was just a delightful conversation. And it just really appreciates so much of, what you've accomplished, what you've done, and just your perspectives today even, I think, are remarkable. There's a lot of information about you just because you've been in public service for a long time. But what's something people wouldn't know about you, something interesting about Ray Palumbo?
Well, back in the day, I aspired to be an NFL quarterback, but I was always too small. So I became a wannabe rock star. Kind of, if you ask my grandkids and my kids, I'd tell you that I'm pretty much a Beatles fanatic. So when I retired in 2015 from the military, I joined a rock band here in the DC metropolitan area, and we'd play clubs and that sort of thing. And to steal a quip from John Lennon when he talked about Ringo Starr, I wasn't even the best drummer in the band. So actually the closest thing that I do to becoming a rock star is I chair the board of a wonderful nonprofit that holds clandestine big name rock and country concerts to raise money for Gold Star families, the fallen of CIA operatives and special operations forces, the shadow warriors of our time. And so we raise money, we give it to the CIA Officer Memorial Foundation and the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. They in turn pay for Gold Star families' education, room and board and tuition and all that stuff. So it's a great thing. And so being around these big name rock and country artists a couple of times a year, raising money for those organizations is truly an honor. And Paul Darley, W.S. Darley, contributes so every time. So it's great.
Wonderful people. And, you just continue to give. And, we're so thankful for, your service and for your continued service to our country. But, one of the things that's fascinating is you had pretty humble beginnings. Tell us a little bit about how your humble beginnings contributed to your success.
My grandfather and grandmother on my father's side owned a tavern, Palumbo's Tavern, in a steel town called Johnstown, PA. And I grew up in a small coal town just outside of Johnstown, and the coal mines used to feed the steel mills to make steel. And if you go back there today, it's kind of a Rust Belt city. Unfortunately, it's a little sad, but my grandparents' kids, they insisted that they go to college. My dad was the oldest. He became an educator, high school football coach, track coach, wrestling, all of that. Eventually grew into a high school principal. His younger brother followed the same route. So we're a family of educators and coaches. And all of us had to play either ball sports or individual sports. I was encouraged to do that. Like I said, I was too small for the NFL, but I did run track and somehow ended up going to West Point and ran track there 4 years, outdoor track and indoor track, and had a great time. And, never thought that I would go into the military. None of my family was in the military, but I fell in love with it, the discipline, the camaraderie, and joined the Army as a young guy, lieutenant, back in the late 70s, and the rest is history. I fell in love with it and stayed a full career.
Yeah. Do you ever think that, like, the fact that you had like sports and coaching was so ingrained in your upbringing and athletics, that really that mentality of how to kind of get the best out of someone was something that really helped you, because it was just part of how you were raised and about everything you did when you were young?
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. The mental toughness that my dad instilled in all of the kids, and his younger brother and his own kids, every one of them played sports. And the fact that they were educators, they demanded academic excellence. So the discipline, learning how to be a team player, learning how to win, learning how to lose with dignity and respect the other team was ingrained as we were growing up. So definitely.
So Ray, of course, West Point's known for duty, honor, country, that sort of commitment. I had the opportunity today to spend time with a wounded warrior who served after he served in the military as well, and he is a little disillusioned right now, and that commitment he had to serve the country is waned, and he still has hope. What would you say to those folks that that served and gave so much, and that might be a little bit disillusioned or frustrated, or feel like the sacrifices they made might not have been worth it? I'm just wondering, because I know you work with veterans and all sorts, and we're trying to, all of us that work with them, Jim as well, try to provide really good counsel and encouragement. What would you say to that person?
I would say hang tough. The pendulum swings. I mean, for whatever reason, that person is disillusioned. My guess is it's probably because of the political discourse we have in our family, or in our country right now, which, it spreads to organizations, corporate, military as well. And the discourse that we have is so polarized. And I don't know where that soldier aligns, but the pendulum will swing. I think someday we'll get back to fighting the game between the 40-yard lines instead of from end zone to end zone. You've heard that analogy before. We need to get some moderation in our politics. We got to get some moderation in our social aspects of our society, and just tell them to keep the faith. And through stronger leadership that's more moderate, I think we'll bring our country back around to competing within the 40-yard lines.
Yeah. In the time you served, peacetime, wartime, I mean, as a cadet, you were taught duty, honor, country. All of that was theoretical. It was academic. and then during peacetime it's one thing, and then serving in wartime and in combat it's different. As you look back over a long, distinguished career, how does that play out now, as you sort of evolve philosophically, and as you provide mentorship for those in the business world that don't necessarily go to work every day with lofty ideals of duty, honor, country, but hey, we got to hit our numbers this quarter.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between being a leader in the military and leader in the corporate world. So I've been out of the military, as I said earlier, for 10 years now, working with a variety of corporations, large ones, small ones, publicly traded ones, family owned like Darley, and others. And I believe it really does come down to values. You mentioned duty, honor, country.
Yeah.
Those three hallowed words, reverently, I know we had to memorize it from Douglas MacArthur's speech back in the late 60s. But those values of duty, honor, country, when I joined the Army, we had our own set of values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. It was an acronym, LDRSHIP. And they issued us little dog tags to put it on our dog tags. They issued us a little card to put in your wallet and all of that stuff. But ultimately, it's something that you had to instill in your being, right? And you had to reflect those values. I look at Darley's values. Darley's values are integrity. They have a passion for customer focus. They want to build relationships based on respect and teamwork and innovation. And then they finish it off with celebration. They have a good time. But I think that as long as we're a values-based organization and we live the values, that we can prevail in these hard times. It's something you can't put in your wallet, hang on your dog tags. You just actually have to live them, and it's much more than theoretical. So when I went on into the military, I was lucky enough, after my first assignment, I went to the infantry basic training, and we didn't have an aviation branch back then, but I was able to make flight school. So I became a helicopter pilot. Later, aviation turned into a branch, and they branched us aviation. But my first assignment was Fort Bliss, Texas, out in the desert, flying helicopters and learning how to become a lieutenant and care for your people, care for the equipment, care for the mission. You were put in a leadership spotlight, and so you learned how to be a leader. But then I was lucky. I learned about this Special Operations Aviation outfit, and that's how I went into the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I was going to get out. I was the oldest grandson, and my grandparents wanted me to come back and run Palumbo's Tavern. I was named after my grandfather, Ray, and boy, talk about a guy who was passionate about his work. He never worked a day in his life and worked over 60 years as a bartender, but he loved it. And so I thought, well, maybe I would do that. But then I got hooked on this special operations business. And that's where I really saw where values such as selfless service, integrity, personal courage, duty, loyalty to the mission, loyalty to the people that we flew around, the special operators from the Army, Rangers, Green Berets, the Navy, SEALs, etc. We used to call them customers, and we were all about supporting them and putting them time on target, plus or minus 30 seconds, on dark nights, bad weather, under night vision devices, in austere conditions, etc. And when you're around people like that, it is contagious. And I'll tell you, that changed my life, joining an organization like that. And, you've heard it said, well, you're the average of 5 people you hang around with most. Well, I wanted to be like them. And every day it was tough. It was tough because it was struggle, because if it was constant assessment. If you don't live up to the standards every day, they will flush you out.
Yep.
And it didn't matter whether you're a lieutenant or a brigadier general or a major general. So it was great.
Well, for those listening, if you were to talk to any of those special mission unit operators, commandos, they would tell you the real heroes are the guys flying around from the 160th. So Ray won't say that, but they would.
I could say it now. I've watched that organization progress for the past 45 years. I left it a long time ago, but truly, truly great Americans who sacrifice a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. And I'm just in awe of, kind of your quiet humility. I mean, I really enjoy all the time we've had to talk together. And when we were speaking earlier, you said something that I don't know if it was an off the cuff remark or something like that, but it just struck me as something I wanted to dig into. You said there's a difference between leadership and generalship. And I just thought that was really worth diving into a little deeper.
Yeah, that the concept is a nuance a little bit. You could be a leader, like a corporate leader, for example. And what's the difference between military leadership and corporate leadership? And then I'll get into the difference between military leadership and generalship. When it comes to mission focus, military leadership is loyal to the Constitution and puts mission above yourself, personal sacrifice. For example, you may be ordered to attack the hill, and you may know, I'm not coming back alive, or at least injured. In corporate leadership, your loyalty is to the company and the personal and corporate goals that are tied mostly to profitability. And so there's a difference, right? In terms of speed of decision making, military leadership, oftentimes it's fast, it's high risk, it's often life or death. In corporate leadership, I've found that it's more analytical, risk managed, business focused. Not to say that you won't get your paycheck and your family will suffer for it if you fail in a corporation, but there's a difference, okay? In terms of communication, probably not so much a big difference. For the military, it's more direct, it's hierarchical, it's orders based. For corporate leadership, what I've found, and this is even big hierarchical corporations like Lockheed's and Raytheon's and a lot of the defense industries, P&G out there and non-defense, but I mean, they could be hierarchical too, but it seems to be more collaborative and less formal. For military leadership, in terms of respect and teamwork, on the military side, it's more universal. It has the requirement for strong unity, whereas in corporate leadership, it varies, I believe. It's more focused on individual performance as individual performance contributes to the corporation winning. And on the cultural side, I talked already a lot about culture. Military is more structured and disciplined, values driven. On the corporate side, it's more flexible, results driven, and you can have diverse cultures. In terms of generalship and how I believe it differs from military, is military organizations are designed by nature to go do certain things. So whether you're in the Army, and we use the Army as an example, but Air Force, the Marines, the Joint Force, organizations are designed for a specific purpose. So an infantry organization, for example, its mission is to close with and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. When you get to the general officer level, you're manipulating a lot of different levers of capabilities. So you're mixing, just inside the Army, you're mixing armored tanks with infantry that might be dismounted, with a helicopter gunship support, with an air assault with Blackhawks coming in and dropping people on buildings and rooftops and between buildings, or you're dealing with artillery, or they're firing howitzers, 105, 155 millimeter indirect fire. You're blending intelligence collection from drones or manned aircraft or from other entities outside the military. Basically, you're combining a lot of different things as a general just in the Army. But then if you're a commander of a joint force, you're combining Army capabilities with naval capabilities, with Air Force capabilities, with Space Force capabilities, cyber capabilities, etc. You have to be a master of a lot of things that you may not be an expert in. And so as a leader, you have to be able to manage a lot of different capabilities on your staff, but sometimes you have to have nuanced understandings of capabilities that you didn't grow up in. So for example, I grew up in the Army. You have to understand things that are outside your area of expertise and have the courage and trust by your superiors to be able to execute an operation. And by the way, this is just the military part of elements of national power from the commander-in-chief. So if you think, up at the level of the White House, the elements of power that the President of the United States as a commander-in-chief wields on a particular day. It's diplomatic information, military is one, economic, financial, et cetera, et cetera. So generalship, in my view, to answer your question finally, is understanding the nuance between management of military capabilities and how the military fits into all the other elements of power at the national level.
Yeah, I just think, that perspective is so fascinating to me because it is just such a much bigger set of options. And maybe it's constrained to some degree because, the government has so many departments, so many different things. But, the reality is like very few corporate leaders have that kind of, breadth of options available to them. And I just thought that was an interesting, observation to make for people to understand that, like, wow, some of the leaders coming out of our military are just dealing with like four-dimensional chess kind of problems where, we might think in the corporate America, we're dealing with like, oh, this is a big, hairy problem. But like, I think the problem set is way more dynamic, way more, complicated, with probably even bureaucracy, but just options in the military. That to me was kind of eye-opening.
Well, there's a lot more moving parts, and the enemy gets a vote.
Well, it's funny you should mention that. I'll tell you one little story where we didn't do so well. So the setting was Afghanistan, and the joint task force that I ran over there, in support of one of your previous guests, by the way, who was my boss, who was over in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan running what they called a combined joint Special Operations Task Force. And we would go around at night chasing bad guys and do operations that sometimes, many times, resulted in kinetic activity. And, sometimes there would be civilian casualties, let's say. And when the sun came up the next morning, what you had to deal with was information challenges at the local level. So figure a province in Afghanistan, or at the national level, at the president's, let's say President Karzai, for example, who was the president at the time, he's dealing with a different level of information operation. And then, of course, the commander on the American side, who was in dialogue there, so that was the ISAF, International Force, which happened to be a NATO force. So then there's the capitals back in Europe that had to deal with it. And then, of course, there's the news cycle in the United States and the global news cycle. So you talk about four-dimensional chess, just an information operation at different levels in different parts of the world and being spun different ways to other people's advantages based on a military operation. And we didn't figure it out at first. We got better at it as time went on. And so to your point about four-dimensional chess, it's definitely a challenge. And you can't isolate, when you think about the elements of power, national power, a nation's power at the White House, they have to manipulate them all in concert with each other.
It's really just amazing. I know that Jan's got some other cool questions he wants to ask, but before I do that, I want to talk about our sponsor a little bit. And, they're wonderful people. It's Darley, the equipment that supports our first responders, law enforcement, and military around the globe. They're just wonderful people. Ray, you might even want to say something about them. And if you want to learn more, you can go to darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
I can't say enough good things about WSR Darley and Company. Wonderful example of generational leadership. It's been around, company's been around for 117 years. They're transitioning from their third generation of leadership under Paul Darley to the fourth generation. And I look forward to another 117 years of a company. They used to say, or they still say, it's company with a soul. And they got a great tagline, like a bumper sticker that says, "You serve others, we serve you." And so, and when you think about values, the Darley team lives their values, and that's what's going to make them a great company into the distant future, is my hope.
Yeah. So Ray, I got an interesting question for you. It's a little bit self-centered. But in my experience, I was Special Forces from age 17 to about age 23. And then from age 23 to 26 or 27, I was conventional forces. I had it backwards. It was a really hard transition to go from elite to conventional Army. I understand you had a similar experience, but a whole different level. You went from the 160th as an aviator to a battalion commander in conventional Army in Germany. And I'm wondering if we had similar experiences, even if they were at very different levels. I was just a lieutenant when I went conventional, and I was an NCO in Special Forces. You were already an officer, and then you were a battalion commander, which is a big deal, lieutenant colonel. So what was the shock for you?
When I was a battalion commander as a lieutenant colonel, I had a 2-star general put his arm around me and said, "Colonel Palumbo, just remember this: we are all benefited and limited by our experiences." And I'll never forget that. What he was, and he didn't mean that in a nice way. I mean, I came out of the 160th and we were doing all these fancy things because, you think about special operations in general, that they pick from the cream of the crop from the services. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're more courageous or more professional or, have different kinds of values, but they are the top 10%, top 15% intellectually, physically, and they pull together as teams really well. So growing up in that environment, I had a level of expectation that was, pretty high. Now I go to conventional forces, and I'm trying to get these guys and gals to do 30-ship air assaults, sling load and howitzers underneath Blackhawks and Chinooks, and at night, the snowy icing, that sort of thing, in a place called Grafenwehr or Hohenfels, Germany, in a small postage stamp size training box. And only by the grace of the good Lord in heaven that we didn't hurt people. And that's when the general, with his wisdom and experience, put his arm around me and told me that I was, limited by my experience and I better tighten up. And so, you don't want to outrun your headlights at times. And that was the big lesson.
Real quick, in 1984, I was on a Black Hawk in Germany doing Reforger with my A team.
Mm-hmm.
And we were split in two, and I was the lieutenant. And so, I had the team, and I had a headset on listening, and we were somewhere in a Class B airspace, which is really busy. I don't know where we were, and it was foggy, and I could hear the control tower yelling at the pilots, that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I remember thinking, we're going to die. And I took my headset off and I said, if we're going to die, I don't want to hear about it. And the whole idea was they were supposed to put us in a potato field somewhere. And eventually they found it and put us in a potato field somewhere. But no, I'll never forget that. It just, it was a crazy, crazy busy airspace.
Well, it speaks to trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? Like was it 2007 or so, I was working for General McChrystal in JSOC, and one of the books that he brought to the staff, as I recall, was called The Speed of Trust. It was by Stephen Covey, whose dad wrote 7 Habits of Highly Successful People or something like that. And, it was true because of the organization that General McChrystal built there and a team of teams. You probably read his book, but trust, it goes a long way on cold, dark nights, doesn't it? when you have to believe that somebody's going to get you where you need to go and you have no control over it. Yeah. But those were pretty cool days in '84. I might have been there with you because Reforger, if you remember, back in the Reagan buildup days, is he promised Europe 10 divisions in 10 days. And we used to practice it every year. Reforger stands for Reinforcement of Germany or something like that. It's an acronym, right?
Yeah.
And every fall we practiced it. And you know what? Today, this summer, they're kind of doing it again. It's called, the Army's doing Defender 2025, which is a sister kind of parallel exercise showing force there in Europe and how we can defend Europe.
Well, my son, who is pretty witty and intelligent, at one point he introduced me to his friends and said, "Hey, here's my dad. He single-handedly won the Cold War. He was there in '84, and the Soviets got a look at him, and 5 years later the wall fell. So it was all my dad. It was all my dad."
Well, thanks, John. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
On behalf of the American people and the world.
He is witty and sarcastic. Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Ray, I know that you do a lot of speaking to people and you talk to corporations now and you share all kinds of, business wisdom. You got like 100 tips you share with folks. Help us understand, how you make your experience relatable to business people that did not serve and don't have these experiences that you've had.
Well, when I talk to some groups, I talk about a small pyramid design that I kind of created, but it's nothing special. I believe that organizations have to be successful organizations, and successful leaders have to establish values of the corporation. So if you imagine a pyramid or a wedding cake, that's the first level that establish the values. And we talked a little bit about the Army's, LDR, SHIP, we talked about Darley's. And then on top of that is you got to cultivate the culture, because the culture reflects values in my mind. Now, I know other people think it's backwards, but let me explain myself. So you got the values as the first level, then the culture is the next one. And then you have to, as a successful leader and successful corporations, you have to have a successful strategy. And that's just organizing, and that's for a whole different briefing, but that's organizing ways and means to achieve the desired ends. So when you think about Covey, right, and the 7 habits of highly successful leaders, it's the habit number 2 where he says you have to begin with the end in mind, right? So a good leader will be able to tell his group, his organization, his military unit, this is the end, okay? And then it's all about vision, and that's at the tip. Vision is it's beyond the battle, it's beyond the campaign, it's beyond the next quarter, the next 5-year plan. It's out there. It's almost like the carrot on the stick. It's a little bit elusive, but it's driving that mission forward. So it's establish the values, cultivate the culture, build a strategy, and then you got to communicate the vision constantly. You got to boil it down into something simple. But culture is so important in my mind, because what is culture? It's aligning the corporate values, the base, to actual personal behavior, how they behave. And so I have this picture of a slide, and I think it's pretty cool. I have this array of, imagine just a bunch of pictures. There's 16 different leaders across the world. And, on the left, it has Margaret Thatcher, and I even have Martin Luther King. I got the Pope. I got Tom Brady. I got Oprah Winfrey, Jobs, Gates. They're all corporate leaders. They're all successful. On the right-hand side, I have Hugh Hefner. He ran Playboy. I got Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin. You could argue they were all successful leaders, at least up to some point, right? Right?
Yeah.
They had different values than I have. So they built their organization on their values and they were successful. And they had a culture that they built around that. I mean, look at Nazi Germany, right? A little bit different than the ones I like on the left-hand side. And so that's why I say it's up to the leader to establish the values of the organization. Then you build a culture. By the way, leaders change. And the culture could change a little bit in my mind as leaders change. And it shouldn't that much. But your values, they need to be rock solid. You should not change your values. And then build your culture, build your strategy, and achieve your vision. And so that's the way I start. And then I have, I've had the fortunate experience to work for many brilliant leaders, political leaders and military and corporate leaders. And geez, when I was a young kid, great coaches and teachers. And of course, my dad and my grandfather, my uncle, and that sort of thing. So what I did was I assembled the good points that I could, share with corporations. I usually pick about 10 or 12 and share them with the audience. And they're not always the same, but it's something that I picked up over a lifetime. And I'm sure I'll still continue to learn and add to the list.
Yeah.
So, Ray, I want to go full circle from where I started at the very beginning. And this isn't a political question. Jim and I really try to avoid politics and religion on the show purposefully because we don't want to alienate anyone. We want to talk about leadership. But, I was thinking about a guest we had on who, I just adore. Her name's Colleen Abdullah. And she said to me one time, hey, there's stuff you want to do because you have a bunch of tools on your tool belt. And then there's stuff you should do because the community, country, society, whatever needs you to do those things, which is going to require sacrifice. So, Martin Dempsey wrote a book, No Time for Spectators, basically encouraged people to jump in the arena. We've had lots of flag officers on, generals and admirals on the show. We've had really tremendous people, and none of them have run for office. And most people would say, boy, there's a lot of great people in this country. Why aren't they running for office? And even in the last election, some of your contemporaries weighed in on the election, wrote some op-ed pieces, different things like that. What's your thought on elections, political office, service, weighing in on those things? Because you come from the old school where some officers didn't even vote. They thought, I shouldn't even vote because I'm going to obey the commander-in-chief no matter who it is. So how did you evolve? Where are you at, based on where you were and where you are today on all that?
Well, when you brought up the first question, Jan, about the soldier who was disillusioned about the current times, this is kind of an extension of that. I believe that we need stronger leadership that's moderate in our politics today. And I believe the wonderful leaders that I've had to work with, it would be great if they would pursue political ambitions. We have some younger folks that either haven't retired from the military, decided to get out, run for Congress. They're increasing at the federal level, and some state and local, of course. You don't read about them too much. But I have a very strong opinion about senior officers, any service, military in particular, but even civilian, opining about the presidential election, about the commander-in-chief. Here's why. Again, if it's not specifically about the commander-in-chief, then it's not such a big issue. But if you discourage, if you come out against the existing commander-in-chief in signing a letter or writing an op-ed or whatever, you have just created a dilemma for soldiers that looked up to you when you were their commander. And what's a dilemma? A dilemma is when you have two values that you hold dear that conflict, right? So think about this. our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, guardians that are in uniform have to follow the Uniform Code of Military Justice, right? And if you're enlisted, especially, you raise your hand to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and to obey the president. Well, if person X, general or admiral, signs a letter and says, "Hey, the president is not a good person," and you look up to him, Private Palumbo looks up to him, I now have a dilemma. I have to follow the UCMJ and the orders of the officers appointed over me, but I also like General or Admiral so-and-so, right? And so I now have a dilemma. I think that we as a military institution, the profession of arms, need to reconcile this. I don't care who, it's the Secretary of Defense or some think tank or academia or the services themselves, the armed services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. They need to come up with a way to avoid this, prevent it, because we need to avoid the dilemma of it. Now, if the person wants to run for office, do it. I think it's great because they're brilliant leaders and they can save our country. Anyway, I have a pretty strong opinion about that, and I don't know if I answered your question, Jan, but if that's what you were getting at.
Yeah, you did, and it's a brilliant. I mean, it's a brilliant perspective. I haven't heard articulated exactly like that, so I appreciate that perspective. Let me ask you this: you've been close to Washington. You know how the sausage is made. Like a lot of people I've spoken to, they said I was so I know what's involved. Not for me. I don't want to put my family through that. Are you of that ilk, or I mean, what's your perspective on that?
None of us are perfect. I especially am not. And my family has suffered enough over my 34 years of service plus 4 years of college. I started a little bit later, but today's political discourse and what happens immediately when you run for office is the other party just goes and just digs into your personal history and all of that. And I think that's a lot of the trepidation that good people have for running for office. They figure, and I fall into this camp, admittedly, we've given a lot already. There are other ways to help as opposed to jumping in the ring and running for office and then dragging your family through all of the shenanigans. I wish I felt differently, but I think a lot of my fellow generals, admirals feel the same way, and that's why they're not running for political office.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate and respect that 100%.
Yeah, I think from a leadership perspective, what I really appreciate about your position on that last question is your consideration is for the private. Your consideration is for the lowest level, soldier that you've had responsibility for, and what does it do to them? And that consideration, I think, says a lot about you, Ray. Really appreciate having you on the show. Anything you want to close out with? Anything you want to share with our listeners?
Sometimes I close with a story. It's more of a recommendation of doing something that I didn't do when I was a young guy, and it's called Scraps of Time. When I was a young plebe at West Point and going through the summer basic training, a popular decorated general came in and gave us a speech. His name was Maxwell Taylor. He was in Korean War, World War II, Vietnam. I think he was the ambassador to Vietnam. He was the chief of staff of the Army. He came in and I thought he was going to talk about all of his exploits. And the title of his speech was Scraps of Time. And all he said was, the bottom line was, if you take advantage of your scraps of time throughout a lifetime, and all things being equal to your competitors, you're going to be ahead. And what I mean by that is, you think about it, I used to hang out and drink beer on the corner of D'Arcangelo's Pizza in my little hometown, right? On Friday nights or Saturdays, I'd goof off. I could have been reading a book or studying a language or, practicing football or my guitar or drums or something like that, And if you take advantage of the scraps of time over a lifetime, it will do you well. And so that's the final message. Do that, and you'll get ahead.
That is awesome. And when we stop recording, I'm going to tell you about a OPD I attended with a very similar story. But Ray, it was really tremendous having you on. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, guys. I really appreciate what you're doing. You're doing your part. I mean, you're going to be 500 here and a decade doing these podcasts when they weren't popular when you started. So keep up the great work.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, for our audience, this might be one of those episodes that we say every once in a while you might want to listen to twice. And that's all we have for you this week. And we'll include ways for you to connect with Ray in our show notes. So make sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, humility and knowledge in poor clothes excel pride and ignorance in costly attire. William Penn.
It's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.